One would like to ask what would be left of Greek drama, which Lukács, like Hegel, has duly canonized, if the criterion of its value were the story which could be picked up in the street. The same holds good for the traditional novel and even for writers such as Flaubert, who come into Lukács' category of the realist novel. Here too, composition and style are fundamental. When empirical veracity has sunk into the level of superficial reportage, the relevance of the technique has increased enormously. By structuring his work, the writer can hope to master the arbitrary and the individual against which Lukács so passionately inveighs. He fails to follow the insight contained in his last chapter to its logical conclusion. The purely arbitrary cannot be overcome simply by a determination to look at things in what purports to be a more objective manner. Lukács ought surely to be familiar with the key importance of the technical forces of production in history. No doubt, this was more concerned with material than with cultural production. Lukács places himself in the great philosophical tradition that conceives of art as knowledge which has assumed concrete shape rather than as something irrational to be contrasted with science. This is perfectly legitimate, but he still finds himself ensnared in the same cult of immediacy of which the myopically accuses modernist literature, the fallacy of mere assertion. Art does not provide knowledge of reality by reflecting it photographically or from a particular perspective, but by revealing whatever is veiled by the empirical form assumed by reality, and this is possible only by virtue of art's own autonomous status. The suggestion that the world is unknowable, which Lukács so indefatigably castigates in writers like Eliot or Joyce, can become a moment of knowledge. Lukács oversimplifies the dialectical unity of art and science, reducing it to bare identity. The essential distinction between artistic and scientific knowledge, however, is that in art nothing empirical survives unchanged. The empirical facts only acquire objective meaning when they are completely fused with the subjective intention. Even though Lukács draws a line between realism and naturalism, he nevertheless fails to make it clear that if the distinction is to hold good, realist writing must necessarily achieve that synthesis with the subjective intentions which he would like to see expelled from realism. In fact, there is no way of preserving the antithesis between realist and formalist approaches. Today, however, we not only see romantic and archaic, pre-bourgeois elements in both novelists, but even worse, Balzac's entire Comédie Humaine stands revealed as an imaginative reconstruction of the alienated world. That is, of a reality no longer experienced by the individual subject. Seen in this light, the difference between it and the modernist victims of Lukács' class justice is not very great. It is just that Balzac, in tune with his whole conception of form, thought of his monologues in terms of the plenitude of real life, while the great novelists of the 20th century encapsulate their worldly plenitude within the monologue. Lukács' concept of perspective sinks inexorably to the level of what he strives in vain to distinguish it from in the last chapter of his book, namely an element of tendentiousness, or, to use his own word, agitation, imposed from without. His whole position is paradoxical. He cannot escape the awareness that aesthetically social truth thrives only in works of art autonomously created. But in the concrete works of modern times, this autonomy is accompanied by all those things which have been proscribed by the prevailing monist doctrine and which he neither could nor can tolerate. It is not good enough for Lukács simply to dismiss the facts that the very products of socialist realism that had claimed to represent an advanced state of consciousness, in fact, do no more than serve up the crumbling and insipid residues of bourgeois art forms. Socialist realism did not simply have its origins, as communist theologians would like to believe, in a socially healthy and sound world. It was equally the product of the backwardness of consciousness and of the social forces of production. The only use they make of the thesis of the qualitative fracture between socialism and the bourgeoisie is to falsify that backwardness, which it has long been forbidden to mention, and twist it into something more progressive. Now, the third section, entitled Commitment. No moral terror can prevent the sight the work of art shows its beholder from giving him pleasure. High spirits, a notion intolerable to people with morals. The primacy of the aesthetic object as pure refiguration does not smuggle consumption and thus false harmony in again through the back door. Committed works all too readily credit themselves with every noble value and then manipulate them at their case. Today, the people whom no bombs could shake out of their complacency have allied themselves with the Philistines who rage against the alleged incomprehensibility of the new art. The underlying impulse of these attacks is petty bourgeois hatred of sex, the common ground of Western moralists and ideologists of social realism. Brecht himself, who was not without ascetic traits which reappear transmuted in the resistance of any great autonomous art to consumption, rightly ridiculed culinary art, but he was much too intelligent not to know that pleasure can never be completely ignored in the total aesthetic effect, no matter how relentless the work. Although the moment of pleasure, even when it is extirpated from the effect of a work, constantly returns to it, the principle that governs autonomous works of art is not the totality of their effects, but their own inherent structure, their knowledge as non-conceptual objects. This is the source of their nobility. It is not something of which they have no persuade men, because it has been given into their hands. This is why today autonomous rather than committed art should be encouraged in Germany. The type of literature that, in accordance with the tenets of commitment but also with the demands of Philistine moralism, exists for man, betrays him by traducing that which could help him, if only it did not strike a pose of helping him. But any literature which therefore concludes that it can be a law unto itself and exists only for itself, degenerates into ideology no less. Art, which even in its opposition to society remains a part of it, must close its eyes and ears against it. It cannot escape the shadow of irrationality, but when it appeals to this unreason, making it a raison d'etre, it converts its own malediction into a theodicy. The moment of true volition, however, is mediated through nothing other than the form of the work itself, whose crystallization becomes an analogy of that other condition which should be. As eminently constructed and produced objects, works of art, including literary ones, points to a practice from which they abstain the creation of a just life. This mediation is not a compromise between commitment and autonomy, nor a sort of mixture of advanced formal elements with an intellectual content inspired by genuinely or supposedly progressive politics. Emphasis on autonomous works is itself socio-political in nature. The feigning of a true politics here and now, the freezing of historical relations which now here seem ready to melt, oblige the mind to go where